What if I told you that changing yourself is a type of death? That every version of you changes, kills the person who existed. The person who lived independently of your flesh. This is the ship of Theseus, a paradox about identity. A paradox that makes us sit and really think about who we really are. Here's its usual mechanics. A ship has its planks replaced one at a time until none of the original material remains. Is it still the same ship? Now imagine if someone reassembles the planks into a second ship. Which one is the ship of Theseus? It brings about a debate in the definition of identity, one from continuity, whereby the ship continues to be what it is. The ship remains the same through an invisible thread of existence despite the additional or entirely different new material. And then there is the material reconstruction, the identity built from the original pieces, from the original person, the original you, even if continuity is broken, that is. Take Makima, for instance. She's cold, manipulative, extremely calculated, and sadistic. The very embodiment of what we know as the control devil. Or not. She has a really twisted way of trying to achieve what would be noble. You know, the whole dominating the chainsaw devil to erase the concepts like death, war, and suffering. But what I want to pose to you guys is Nayuta Makima? Is there genuine continuity present? Is Nayuta Makima because of her being is from Makima's person? And does that invisible thread I was talking about earlier exist? Does her identity exist outside of Makima independently? Like I said earlier, identity from the original you. Before I go any further though, there will be spoilers, mainly for the end of part 1 and part 2. Nayuta comes about from Makima being devoured by Pochita at the end of part 1. This is a mechanism that leads to Nayuta's existence. We get introduced to Nayuta in part 2 as a child who shares resemblance to Makima, yet she has no genuine memories of her previous life. And then we get a glimpse of what some would argue as continuity, where she perceives Yor, the war devil who was possessing Asa, as a threat, accusing her of, and I quote, theft. What did she steal, you ask? Denji. Anyway, because she saw her as a threat, she uses the same ability Makima would use. Funny really, but in reality terrifying, because at the time you couldn't help but ask, is she really someone different? Or is she Makima? Kishibe points this out. He warns Denji that if she's raised wrong, she'll just turn out to be another Makima. And that's the heart of the paradox, because here Kishibe is treating her as a completely different person, but also not at the same time. And that's the paradoxical nature of all this. So what does count as being the same? On one hand, her earlier behavior is written in a way that suggests she's a completely different person, childlike even. Her negotiating for ice cream is all the proof you need. That and her jealousy when Denji shows interest in Asa. But on a serious note, she feels like a completely different person. With that being said, she still has Makima's exact ability. And the situation in all this is basically the continuity of her essence is sitting right next to the evidence of total discontinuity of the self in the same handful of moments basically. And then you start to think about it, identity being shaped by the environment. Denji raising Nayuta in an ordinary domestic life is exactly the kind of life you can't imagine Makima ever having. And yet traces of Makima still exist anyway. Her rules about who Denji can be close to are framed in a way that suggests jealousy, but it does portray a sort of control over his relationships, just like Makima did. And then Nayuta, despite not actually being Makima, continued to be treated as a potential asset or threat, rather than an actual child, regardless of how she's actually being raised. So then nature versus nurture argument persists to be a complex thing. So that begs the question, whether identity is purely built by nature, or is it proof that something much deeper continues to exist no matter what surrounds it? But does Chainsaw Man argue against strict continuity mattering at all? Denji's whole decision to raise her differently is a bet that a person becomes something other than what is their essence alone. The story underlines these stakes of that bet in the most brutal ways possible when you really think about it. At one point, Baron presents Nayuta's severed head to Denji, And the devastation Denji feels only makes sense if Naito's value to him was never about her continuity. It was about her being his family. Food for thought reading. The person the story insists on treating as ambiguous in terms of identity is actually very straightforward to Denji. This is one of, if not the best portrayals of identity. Don't you ever find it strange that institutions, brands, and languages are treated as the same, despite the change in their structure and personnel over time? And then there's Denji and Pochita. Is Denji still Denji despite having Pochita in him? What constitutes his being Denji? You see how complex and paradoxical identity is? Even with different cases. Because Naito's case is different, hers isn't a shared body with separate shared existence. It's one continuous essence of not two things sharing one body, but explicitly written as separate people. So I want to pose this question. When Naito finally remembers being Makima, that is if he ever had the chance to, will it be Makima returning, or will it just be Naito remembering a stranger's life?